The crystal glass felt cold and heavy in her hand. Eliza adjusted her grip, the smooth stem a fragile anchor in a sea of murmuring voices and expensive perfume. She stood just behind the wheelchair, a silent statue in her practical black dress, her presence a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and tailored suits that filled the grand ballroom. This was her job, to be a shadow, a pair of capable hands for the man who could no longer use his own. Marco De Luca sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the swirl of the party he was hosting. He looked like a king on a broken throne. The cut of his dark wool suit was immaculate. His black hair was styled with precision, and a heavy gold signet ring adorned the little finger of a hand that rested, limp and useless, on the arm of his chair. He was the most powerful man in the room, perhaps the city. Everyone knew it, and everyone knew he was now a cripple. A woman in a dress the color of blood drifted by, her eyes lingering on Marco with a pity so sharp it was almost contempt. Eliza felt a muscle in her jaw tighten. They saw the chair. They saw the stillness. They did not see the predatory intelligence in his dark eyes, an unnerving focus that missed nothing. She had been his private nurse for 2 months, and she had learned that his mind was the most dangerous weapon in the room. However, it was his body that was supposed to be broken. The car accident had been brutal, stealing the life of his older brother and leaving Marco, the formidable Don of the De Luca family, paralyzed from the waist down, with significant nerve damage in his arms and hands. Or so the story went. "A little to the left," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise, meant only for her. Eliza complied, pushing the wheelchair a few feet toward a marble column, giving him a better vantage point of the entrance. She saw one of his top men, a capo named Vincent, greet a new arrival with a handshake that was more of a power play. She had learned to read these small rituals. Everything in this world was a test. A server offered a tray of canapes. Marco inclined his head slightly. Eliza picked up a small toast topped with prosciutto and figure. It was part of the performance, a nightly ritual of dependence that she suspected he loathed more than anything. She brought the morsel to his lips. His mouth opened just enough to accept it. For a fraction of a second, his lips brushed the tips of her fingers. The contact was brief, impersonal, and yet it sent a jolt through her system that she immediately suppressed. It was just a job. She was good at her job. She was patient, efficient, and unimpressed by the opulent cage she now lived and worked in. She monitored his vitals, administered his medications, and assisted with the physical therapy that seemed to yield no results. She saw him at his most vulnerable, a man stripped of the physical power that had defined him. She had bathed him, dressed him, and fed him, and in all that time he had never shown a flicker of weakness. Not once, only a terrifying, coiled stillness. A portly man with a florid face and sweat beading on his upper lip approached them. His name was Russo, a rival from another family, here to pay his respects, which meant he was here to gauge the extent of the damage. "Marco," Russo said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "It is good to see you out and about. We were all so very worried." Marco did not respond. He simply watched the man, his expression unreadable. Russo's eyes flickered to Eliza, then back to Marco. "A shame what happened. A real shame. To be reduced to this," he gestured vaguely at the wheelchair. "Fed like a baby. A man like you." Eliza felt a surge of cold anger. The insult was deliberate, a knife twisted in a wound. She expected Marco to remain silent, to let the insult hang in the air as he always did, his stillness his only reply. But then she saw it. His left hand, the one with the signet ring, was resting on the leather armrest. For a single, imperceptible moment his fingers curled. The movement was tiny, a fractional clenching of muscle and tendon, but it was there, a flicker of immense strength, leashed and controlled, a predator feigning sleep. Her breath caught in her throat. It was not a spasm. It was not an involuntary twitch. It was a choice. He was not paralyzed. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The whole thing, The limp hands, the useless legs, the months of painstaking care was a lie. A performance for an audience of sharks like Russo. And she was the star player in his deception, the prop that made it all believable. The loyal, unassuming nurse. That night, after the last guest had departed and the mansion fell into a weighted silence, she was helping him prepare for bed. The routine was familiar. She operated the lift to move him from his chair to the mattress, her movements practiced and professional. She ignored the solid warmth of his body, the scent of sandalwood and expensive soap that clung to him. As she straightened the sheets around him, he spoke. "Russo is a pig." "Yes," she said, her voice carefully neutral. She kept her eyes on her task, her hands smoothing a wrinkle in the duvet. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She knew too much. The knowledge was a lead weight in her stomach. "He thinks I am finished," Marco continued, his gaze boring into the side of her head. "They all do." She risked a glance at him. His face was cast in the dim light from the hallway, all sharp angles and deep shadows. "It is what you want them to think." The words were out before she could stop them. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. The silence that followed was absolute. She had overstepped. She had acknowledged the lie. In this house, in this life, acknowledging a lie could get you killed. She stood perfectly still, waiting. He did not deny it. He simply watched her, his eyes searching hers for what? Fear? Ambition? He would find neither. Only a weary pragmatism. She had signed on to care for a patient, and she had found herself an accomplice in a war. "My brother Paolo was driving that night," he said, his voice raw. The brakes were cut. It was not an accident. He had never spoken of his brother before. The admission was a stone dropped into a deep well. "They wanted to kill me," he went on, "but they got him instead. The traitor is still in my house. Someone I trust. Someone who eats at my table. And they will not show their hand while I am strong. But a cripple." He let the word hang in the air. "A cripple is an opportunity." So that was it. A trap. And she was the bait. Or at least the stage dressing. He was using his supposed weakness to draw out a snake. "You are in danger now, Eliza," he said. Her name on his lips was different. Not the clipped, professional tone he usually used. It was softer, heavier. A warning. "You know the truth. I cannot let you leave." She looked at him, really looked at him, lying there, pretending to be helpless. She thought she was here to do a job. She believed her role was simple. But that belief was a fantasy. She was a piece on his board now, and the game had already begun. She could not leave. She could not speak. All she could do was play her part and pray she survived the final move. Therefore, her life shrank to the gilded walls of the De Luca mansion. She was a prisoner, but her cage was luxurious. Her days fell into the same rhythm, but now every moment was charged with a new, terrifying awareness. Every meal she prepared, every therapy session she administered, was part of the elaborate theater. She would stretch his legs, her hands working the dormant muscles, and feel the coiled power within them. He would let out a soft groan of what was supposed to be pain. His eyes closed, and she would see the faint tremor of a muscle in his jaw as he fought to keep the limb pliant and unresponsive. He was an incredible actor. One evening, she brought his dinner tray to his study. It was a simple meal, chicken broth and soft bread, food for an invalid. He was by the window, his wheelchair angled toward the darkening New York skyline. He had not turned on the lamps, and the room was filled with the blue twilight. "Leave it on the desk," he said without turning. She set the tray down, her senses on high alert. Something felt wrong. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with their secret. She noticed a faint, almost chemical smell coming from the soup, something acrid that did not belong. She had spent years in hospitals. She knew the scent of medicine, and this was not it. She picked up the spoon and dipped it into the broth, raising it to her nose. The smell was stronger now. Bitter almonds. Cyanide. Her blood ran cold. "Do not eat it," she whispered, her voice tight. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding hers in the gloom. "What is it?" "The soup. It's wrong." He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured toward the bowl with a slight nod. She understood. He wanted to see it, to confirm it. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the bowl over to him. He leaned forward, inhaling deeply. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. The traitor had grown impatient. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than calculation in his eyes. It was a flicker of respect. And something else. Something protective. "You just saved my life, Eliza. It's my job to keep you healthy," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "This goes beyond the job," he countered, his voice low and intense. "You could have said nothing. You could have walked away." She had not even considered it. Her professional ethics, her basic human decency, had kicked in without thought. But he was right. She could have let him die. She could have been free. But she had not. She had made a choice. Because of that choice, the dynamic between them shifted. He began to talk to her, not just as a nurse, but as a confidant. In the dead of night, during the long hours when the house slept, he would tell her about his brother, Paolo. He spoke of their childhood, of the oath they had both taken, of the weight of the family name. "He was the better man," Marco said one night, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. "He had a heart. I only have a ledger, debts and payments. He tried to pull me toward the light. I dragged him into the dark." He blamed himself for Paolo's death. The guilt was a cancer eating him from the inside, and this hunt for the traitor was his only penance. Eliza found herself listening, offering not platitudes or comfort, but a quiet, steady presence. She was seeing the man beneath the monster, the wound he carried so carefully hidden behind layers of ice and control. One afternoon, during a physical therapy session, she was kneeling on the floor, stretching his calf muscle. His leg was solid and warm beneath her hands. The pretense felt more absurd than ever. "Push harder," he instructed, his voice a low command. She increased the pressure, her palms pressing into the powerful muscle. He let out a sharp hiss of breath, but it was not from pain. It was from the strain of keeping the muscle from contracting, from responding naturally to her touch. "Why him?" she asked quietly, not looking up. "Why did they want you dead?" "Territory," he answered simply. "The Antonelli family wants my shipping lanes. They have for years. But they are not smart enough to plan an attack like this. The betrayal came from inside my own house." She looked up then, meeting his gaze. His eyes were dark pools, reflecting the dim light of the room. He reached out, his hand moving with a slowness that was part of the act, and his fingers brushed against her wrist. His touch was feather-light, yet it burned like a brand. It was a gesture of something, not gratitude, not comfort. It was a connection, a silent acknowledgement of the strange, dangerous space they now occupied together. Just the two of them against a house full of enemies. Therefore, her world became a chessboard. She was no longer just a nurse. She was Marco's eyes and ears, moving through the mansion with a new purpose. She watched the staff, the guards, the capos who came and went. She listened to snippets of conversation, observed the subtle shifts in loyalty and fear. She was looking for the snake. The danger was no longer just his. It was hers. One afternoon, she was in the vast, two-story library, seeking a few moments of peace. She had found an old medical text and was sitting in a leather armchair directly beneath the massive wrought-iron chandelier. The house was quiet. Suddenly, she heard a creak from above, a sound of stressed metal. She glanced up. One of the thick chains holding the chandelier was groaning, a link visibly straining. She scrambled out of the chair, her heart leaping into her throat, just as the chain snapped. The chandelier plunged downward with a deafening crash, shattering on the marble floor where she had been sitting seconds before. Shards of crystal sprayed across the room like shrapnel. She stood frozen, her body trembling, dust and pulverized glass settling around her. It was not an accident. The chain had been deliberately weakened. It was a message. They knew he was being protected. They were coming for her. Marco was incandescent with a silent, terrifying rage when his men brought him to the library. He surveyed the wreckage from his wheelchair, his face carved from stone. But his eyes, when they met hers, were blazing. It took every ounce of his formidable control not to betray himself, not to rise from that chair and tear his own house apart to find the man responsible. That night, Eliza could not sleep. The near miss had shattered her composure. She knew she had to do more than just watch. She had to act. She thought back over the past few weeks, searching for a detail, anything out of place. And then she remembered. The night of the poisoning. After the tray had been taken away, a guard had come in to check the room. His name was Leo. He was one of Marco's most trusted soldiers, a man who had always treated her with a quiet kindness. She remembered the scent of his cigarettes, a particular Turkish brand. She had smelled that same faint, acrid scent on the bowl of soup. It was a flimsy connection, but it was something. She slipped out of her room, a ghost in the sleeping mansion. She made her way to the staff quarters, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Leo's room was unlocked. She pushed the door open, her breath held tight in her chest. The room was Spartan but clean. On the small bedside table, next to an ashtray, was a pack of cigarettes. The Turkish brand. And next to it, a small vial nearly empty with no label. She picked it up. A single drop of clear liquid remained inside. She did not need a lab to know what it was. She had crossed a line. This was not the act of a nurse. This was the act of a conspirator. She took the vial and the cigarette pack and went straight to Marco's study. He was there, as she knew he would be, sitting in the dark. She did not speak. She walked to his desk, switched on the small lamp, and placed the evidence on the polished wood between them. The cigarettes, the vial. He looked from the items to her face. His expression was impossible to read. He did not ask how she got them. He did not ask if she was certain. He already knew. The look in his eyes confirmed it. He had suspected Leo, but he had needed proof. He had needed a move from the traitor that he could not ignore. The attack on her had been that move. Leo, he said, the name a curse. He had treated Leo like a younger brother. The betrayal was a fresh wound on top of the old one. He looked at Eliza, and the cold fury in his eyes was mingled with something else, something raw and possessive. You see things others do not. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of ownership. He reached across the desk and his hand closed over hers, his grip surprisingly strong. There was no pretense of weakness now. Eliza, he said, and the way he spoke her name was a vow. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. It was his confession, not of love, but of a darker, more binding truth. She was his. She thought bringing him the truth would make her safe, part of his inner circle, protected. But she was wrong. The next morning, as she walked down the grand staircase, Leo stepped out from behind a pillar. He moved with a speed that belied his size. Before she could scream, his arm was around her throat, the cold steel of a knife pressing against her skin. "We are leaving, boss," Leo shouted, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. He began dragging her toward the door, her body a shield between him and the guards who were now appearing, their weapons drawn. Marco emerged from his study, his face a thundercloud. He wheeled himself to the top of the stairs, his men parting before him. "Let her go, Leo." Marco's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. Leo laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "And let you kill me? I don't think so. I know about your little secret. I have been watching. You are not as clever as you think." He tightened his grip, the knife nicking Eliza's skin. "What are you going to do from that chair, Marco? What can a cripple do to stop me?" The taunt hung in the air. This was it, the final move of the game. Eliza knew she could not wait to be rescued. Her mind raced. She remembered a self-defense class she had taken years ago, a single move designed to create a moment's distraction. She stomped down hard, with the heel of her sensible shoe onto Leo's instep. He grunted in pain, his grip faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She drove her elbow back, slamming it into his ribs with all her strength. He gasped, his arm loosening just enough. In that sliver of time, the world seemed to stop. From the top of the stairs, Marco De Luca stood up. The movement was not jerky or strained. It was a fluid, powerful unfolding of a predator revealing its true form. The silence in the foyer was absolute, broken only by Leo's strangled gasp of disbelief. The men, his own soldiers, stared in shock at their leader, standing tall and whole. The ruse was over. Marco moved with a surgical, lethal grace. He was down the stairs in a blur, his hand clamping onto Leo's wrist, twisting it with an audible snap. The knife clattered to the floor. Two of his guards surged forward, dragging the whimpering, broken traitor away. His fate was sealed. The foyer was silent again, the tension slowly bleeding out of the air. Marco stood before her, no longer a patient, no longer a man in need of her care. He was the Don in all his terrifying authority. He did not look at his men. He looked only at her. He reached out and his fingers gently touched the small cut on her neck where the knife had been. His touch was possessive, a brand. "He was right about one thing," he said, his voice a low growl that was for her alone. "I could not let him hurt you." He did not apologize for the months of deception. He did not explain. He stated a fact, an absolute truth that had been proven in blood and betrayal. What she was to him was no longer deniable, no longer a secret. It was a fact as solid as the marble beneath their feet. The cost of that truth was steep. His enemies now knew he was not weak. But they also knew he had a weakness. Her life would never be her own again. Later that night, the mansion was still. The wheelchair sat in the corner of his study, a strange, empty monument to a war that had been won. Marco stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking out at the glittering sprawl of the city he controlled. Eliza entered the study without knocking. The door whispered shut behind her. He did not turn, but he spoke to her reflection in the dark glass. "You could leave," he said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion. "I would arrange it. A new name, a new life. Anywhere you want to go. You would be safe." It was an offer of freedom, an escape from the gilded cage. She could walk out that door and never look back. She could be a nurse again, in an ordinary world where the greatest danger was a falling patient, not a falling chandelier. She walked across the thick Persian rug until she stood beside him. She looked at his reflection, at the hard lines of his face, the unyielding set of his jaw. She saw the man who had lied to her, used her, and put her life in mortal danger. She also saw the man who had stood up from his throne of lies to save her. She looked at the empty wheelchair in the corner. Then she looked back at him. She did not say a word. She did not need to. Instead, she reached out and laid her hand on his forearm. The muscle beneath the fine wool of his jacket was tense, solid as rock. Her touch was a quiet answer, a choice made with open eyes. In this world, nothing was given. Everything was taken or earned. And in the silence of that room, with the city lights blazing below, she claimed her place at his side.